Basements. For most, they're just a space to store old furniture, forgotten memories, or dusty holiday decorations. But for some, basements are a gateway, a dark, cold space where the line between reality and nightmares begins to blur. Our first story takes place in the quiet suburbs of Ohio, where 32-year-old Michael had just inherited his late uncle's house. It wasn't much to look at, a run-down, creaky old home that hadn't been touched in years. But to Michael, it was an opportunity, a chance to fix it up and turn it into something new. The house had a strange energy to it, though, something Michael couldn't quite put his finger on. The air was thick and damp, carrying the faint scent of mildew and something else he couldn't identify. But it wasn't until he ventured into the basement things started to feel truly off. The stairs groaned under his weight as he descended into the dimly lit space. A single flickering bulb hung from the ceiling, casting long shadows on the concrete walls. Boxes and furniture were scattered everywhere, covered in a thick layer of dust. But what caught Michael's attention was a door, a small wooden door built into the far corner of the basement wall. It didn't match the rest of the house. The wood looked older, darker, and the handle was rusted but oddly intricate, like something you'd find in an antique shop. He tried to open it, but it wouldn't budge. That's when he noticed the faint rhythmic sound. Thud, thud, thud. His heart raced as he pressed his ear to the door. The sound grew louder, almost like footsteps, but they weren't coming from behind the door. They were coming from inside the walls. Michael took a step back, a chill running down his spine. He decided it was best to leave the door alone, at least for now. But as he turned to leave, he felt it, a soft cold breeze brushing against his neck. Someone, or something, was watching. The introduction sets the tone for Michael's story, creating an eerie and unsettling atmosphere. The door and the strange sounds hint at the horrors that will soon unfold, leaving the audience eager to see what happens next. Michael couldn't shake the feeling of unease as he ascended the basement stairs. That strange wooden door lingered in his thoughts. Who builds a door inside a basement wall? And what was that sound? He tried to distract himself by focusing on the repairs the house needed, but it was no use. Every time he walked past the basement door, he felt drawn to it, as if the door was calling to him. One evening, after a long day of unpacking, curiosity got the better of him. Michael grabbed a flashlight and headed back down into the basement. This time, he was determined to figure out what lay behind the door. With his flashlight in hand, Michael examined the door closely. The intricate handle had strange markings etched into it, symbols he didn't recognize. He pressed his ear to the wood again, listening. The rhythmic thuds had stopped, replaced by an eerie silence. Using a crowbar, he pried at the edges of the door. The wood creaked and groaned, resisting him. Finally, with one last pull, the door burst open, revealing a narrow, dark passageway. The air that wafted out was damp and cold, carrying the scent of decay. Michael hesitated, but his curiosity overpowered his fear. He stepped into the passage, the beam of his flashlight barely penetrating the darkness. The walls were lined with old bricks, many of which were cracked and crumbling. The floor was uneven, littered with debris. As he moved deeper, the air grew colder, and he began to hear faint whispers. Michael. He froze. The voice was faint, almost imperceptible, but it sounded like it was coming from up ahead. The passage opened into a small room. At the center was a wooden table covered in a thick layer of dust. On it lay a notebook, its pages yellowed and brittle. Michael picked it up and flipped through its pages. The writing was erratic, scrawled in what looked like desperation. Phrases like, "The door must remain shut," and "She is coming," were repeated over and over. A loud crash from behind startled him, and he spun around, his flashlight flickering. The door to the passage had slammed shut on its own. His heart raced as he ran back and tried to open it, but it wouldn't budge. The whispers grew louder, echoing around him. He turned back to the room and saw something that made his blood run cold. A figure standing in the shadows, barely visible. "Who's there?" he called out, his voice trembling. The figure didn't move but seemed to melt into the darkness. Michael's flashlight flickered again and went out, plunging him into complete darkness. As Michael fumbled to turn his flashlight back on, the whispers became clearer. They weren't just random sounds, they were voices, and they were speaking to him. "Why did you open the door?" one voice demanded. "You weren't supposed to come here," another hissed. When the flashlight finally flickered back to life, Michael saw something carved into the wall. It was his name, repeated dozens of times. Beneath it was a date, the exact day his uncle had died. Panic set in as Michael realized the door wasn't meant to keep people out. It was meant to keep something else in. The whispers turned into a deafening roar, and the shadows in the room began to move. A dark, humanoid figure emerged, its form shifting and writhing like smoke. Michael stumbled backward, clutching the notebook like it was some kind of shield. The figure moved closer, its hollow eyes glowing faintly. "You've freed me," it said, its voice like 100 whispers combined. Michael ran back to the door, pounding on it with all his strength. "Let me out," he screamed, but the door wouldn't budge. The figure reached out, its shadowy hand brushing against Michael's shoulder. A searing pain shot through him and he collapsed to the ground. When he woke up, he was back in his living room. The door to the basement was gone, replaced by a smooth, unbroken wall. Michael sat in his living room, staring at the wall where the basement door used to be. His mind raced as he tried to piece together the events from the night before. Was it all in his head? Had he really seen that shadowy figure, heard those voices? The smooth, unbroken wall mocked him, as if the door had never existed. But the faint pain in his shoulder, where the figure had touched him, was real, a constant reminder that something had happened. He grabbed the notebook from the coffee table, flipping through its pages again. One phrase stood out, repeated over and over: "The door must remain shut." Suddenly, the lights flickered. A chill ran through the room and the air grew heavy. Michael's breath hitched as he felt a familiar cold breeze brush against the back of his neck. "Not again," he whispered. As he turned around, he saw it, the same shadowy figure standing in the corner of the room. Its form was darker than before, almost solid, with glowing hollow eyes that seemed to pierce through him. "You thought you could lock me away," it hissed, its voice a cacophony of whispers. "But I never left." Michael stumbled backward, clutching the notebook like a lifeline. "What do you want from me?" he demanded, his voice shaking. The figure stepped closer, its presence making the air around him colder. "You opened the door," it said. "Now you're the door." Michael's heart sank. The meaning of the words dawned on him. He wasn't just haunted. He had become a vessel, a conduit for whatever this entity was. Desperate, Michael remembered the symbols etched into the notebook. He frantically flipped through the pages, hoping to find some way to stop the entity. His hands trembled as he traced the strange markings, chanting the words written beneath them. The figure let out a guttural roar, its shadowy form twisting and writhing. The walls of the living room began to crack, revealing the same dark passageway he had found in the basement. "You can't banish me," the entity bellowed. "I am a part of you now." Michael screamed the words from the notebook louder, his voice cracking with desperation. The figure lunged at him, but just as its hand reached his chest, the symbols on the page began to glow. A blinding light filled the room, and the figure let out an unearthly scream as it was pulled back into the shadows. The passageway collapsed, the walls sealing shut. The light faded, leaving Michael alone in the room. He gasped for air, clutching his chest. For a moment it felt like it was over, but then he noticed his reflection in the mirror across the room. It wasn't moving. Michael froze as his reflection smiled back at him, its eyes glowing faintly. "You might have closed the door," it said, "but I'm still here." The lights flickered one last time, and the room plunged into darkness. The house was silent. The cracks in the walls had disappeared, the air had returned to normal, and the notebook lay untouched on the floor. To anyone else it would seem like nothing had happened, but Michael knew better. He sat on the edge of his couch, staring at the mirror on the far wall. His reflection stared back, but it no longer felt like his own. The faint glow in its eyes was gone, but the memory lingered, a sinister reminder of what had transpired. He wanted to believe it was over, that the door had been closed for good, but as he reached for the notebook, his fingers trembled. The final page, one he hadn't noticed before, now had a single message written in bold, jagged letters: "The door is never truly shut." Michael's heart raced as a faint noise echoed from the basement. The familiar rhythmic thud, thud, thud. The camera pans away from Michael as he cautiously approaches the wall where the basement door once stood. His silhouette fades into the darkness, and the screen cuts to black. Some doors are better left unopened, but curiosity is a dangerous thing, and as Michael discovered, once you've opened the door, it's impossible to truly close it again. So, the next time you hear a strange sound from below, will you resist the urge to investigate? Basements are meant to hold secrets, but some secrets are better left undiscovered. Michael's story reminds us that curiosity can lead to places we're not prepared for, and yet the question remains, if you heard something in the dark, would you go looking for it? If these stories gave you chills, don't forget to hit that like button. It helps more people discover these spine-tingling tales. Share this video with someone you know who loves a good scare, and make sure to subscribe for more horrifying stories just like this one. And remember, the next time you hear a sound coming from below, think twice before opening the door.